Okay, hello everyone. I hope we're all well and happy. Okay, then. So, last lesson we were looking at what the ministers do, and I asked you to do a little bit of work on the Prime Minister. No one's got back to me, so I'm assuming we're all happy on that. Um, that little episode in the secret world of Whitehall, the bit you had to watch, I think it reveals some quite nice things about ministers and the fact they have these political advisors and some of the tension you get between civil servants and these advisors from time to time. Is this the one? It was last year since I last saw this. The one where they have the Department for Penis, and it kind of highlights through all the civil service sometimes in identifying problems which haven't arisen as yet. Okay, so it's an important aspect. And then what I asked you to do was to look at the informal powers and the functions of the Prime Minister. Now, the key thing with the Prime Minister is that there's no job description. It officially doesn't exist. It's a convention that we have a Prime Minister, I suppose. A lot of the powers which the Prime Minister has are those prerogative powers of the executive. So remember last lesson or the lesson before, you had to do that work on the prerogative powers which the monarch has, which kind of the government have kind of taken over. Well, many of those are held by the Prime Minister, things like appointing and dismissing ministers, for example, deciding on departments, merging government departments together, breaking them up from time to time. These sorts of things, as well as other powers, which again, on that diagram, it has a number of these powers. And all you had to do is explain what these things were. I mean, hopefully they should make sense. So you got appointing and dismissing ministers. That's kind of self-explanatory. I find a couple of examples of ministers who've been sacked or have been removed. Think of new ministers. So obviously all the ones Boris Johnson put into his cabinet after the general election. Obviously his appointing ministers, aren't they? Direction of government policy. So that's an informal role. So the Prime Minister is kind of in charge of knowing what the direction of the government is and what the government are going to do. So obviously, like Mrs Thatcher had a fairly clear agenda where she wanted things to go. You could say Tony Blair did as well. And obviously that changed over time. So the Iraq War became a big aspect of government policy, but so too did reforming public institutions. You could say David Cameron as Prime Minister with austerity following the financial crash. So directing government policy. Okay, I suppose you could say Boris had the whole Brexit, trying to sort out Brexit, wasn't it? Obviously, he's then taken over with the current situation. Representing the UK abroad, again, I hope that's fairly self-explanatory. When we were a member of the EU on a very regular basis, the Prime Minister would go to Council of Europe meetings with other heads of state to discuss heads of states to have to do with the European Union, but also, of course, Prime Ministers go abroad quite often, don't they? So Trump, he's been to see Donald Trump, hasn't he? Boris Johnson at least once. Theresa May went there a couple of times. And they go to other countries as well, doing a little bit of mixture, trying to sell Britain, sell British trade and things like that. A little bit of soft power as well, meeting foreign heads of states. We've got managing and chairing the cabinet. So the cabinet are these top ministers, remember. Once a week there's a cabinet meeting, and they discuss what they're going to do the next week, where the agenda is. We'll do this more next week about the Prime Minister and the cabinet. Political leadership and managing relations with Parliament. So obviously the executive has got its agenda to get through. They've got to deal with Parliament. So again, part of his role is leading that. Think how often Theresa May was in the House of Commons every time she was defeated on those Brexit negotiations, trying to get the Brexit deal through. She spent quite a lot of time in Parliament trying to get her agenda through and failing miserably. But they do provide that leadership. And then national leadership. So again, I'm thinking money for crises for this. So there are times, aren't there, where the Prime Minister does kind of speak for the nation in terms of some kind of crisis. Again, you could argue with the COVID-19. Johnson did that early on. Then, of course, he was sick himself. And actually, it's quite interesting with Boris Johnson because even though he's kind of recovered, hasn't he? He's still having those ministers doing quite a few of those press meetings rather than he himself, which I think previous prime ministers have probably done more than themselves. So it's quite interesting how he's taken that slight step back. Although when there's something serious he wants to discuss regarding the current crisis, up he pops. So obviously he was on national telly, wasn't he, when announced we're going to have the lockdown. This Sunday he's going to pop up again, isn't he, giving some kind of idea and strategy about how we're going to get out of this. So they do provide national leadership. I mean, this is obviously quite dramatic, this one about this current crisis, but like under David Cameron, there was some flooding issues. There was a couple of floods that took place, and up popped David Cameron with his wellies on. When London had the riots in 2000 and I think it was 2011, Cameron was abroad in Portugal or somewhere, just on his holidays. And there's a great big clamour that he should come back. I mean, I don't know what he was going to do, physically stop the riots. But anyway, he did come back. He was then on the scene on the streets, kind of afterwards, watching them kind of, I don't know, mopping up the mess that had been made. So, providing national leadership. In America, they often call this the consoler in chief. But we'll do that next year. Okay then, so what I wanted to do today then is there's a table on this next 2 pages called What are the main resources available to provide prime ministerial power? So you've got patronage, authority in the cabinet system, policy making, leadership, public standing. One crucial thing with the UK Prime Minister is, unlike all the other members of their government, they don't have their own dedicated government department. So like the Home Secretary has got tens of thousands of civil servants who she is responsible for and kind of provides her with policy ideas and all that type of stuff. Well, number 10 doesn't do. So in some ways it's kind of like the weakest member of the government, yet also it leads the government in a kind of ironic way. Now, Harold Wilson back in the 1960s and 70s wanted to change this, and he did create a Prime Minister's office. And it has grown a little bit, but not massively. It's quite a small group of people in Downing Street who kind of try to coordinate all the government departments. And their main job of this small clique, if you like, is about communications, so dealing with the media, because obviously the media always go to the Downing Street when there's some kind of issue, and trying to deal with policy kind of initiatives. But it's quite striking in Britain how the Prime Minister's got a relatively small number of staff in this Prime Minister's office compared to each of his or her cabinet members who've got tens of thousands of civil servants. Anyway, they do have a number of other resources, patronage, which we've mentioned before, authority in the cabinet system, etc., etc. And using, so I find the page number, it's in the Lincoln Fairclough textbook. It's on page 124, all the way to 129. I think in class what I normally do, I normally give a group one of these to do. I'm going to do it on sugar paper and then we kind of swap it around and do it that way. Obviously we can't do that, so we're going to have to, you can imagine doing it on sugar paper if you like, you can imagine doing it in a group, but you're not doing. Try to give, because this textbook was written a couple of years ago, try to think of any more recent examples for any of the points, or so you can find some more recent examples. So, for example, Theresa May dealing with her cabinet was a bit different to Boris Johnson. Again, we'll do most of that next week, so don't worry too much. Public standing, you see, there's a little bit with the COVID-19, or you could possibly get in there a little bit, couldn't you? So have a think about that. There's then a couple of bullet point questions underneath. Which of these resources do you think is the most significant? And which of these resources do you think Theresa May lost at the 2017 general election? Okay, so I'd like you to do that. What I'd then like you to do is, there's a video, it's called The Secret World of Whitehall. It's on Teams. There's 3 episodes, and it's episode 2, I believe. It's about Downing Street. I think it's called Behind the Black Door or something like that. I've just watched it. I've got a load of questions, so I just need to tippy-tap up. So once I tippy-tap them up, on the email, I'll send them out to you all. And I'd like you to watch the video. It's about an hour long and answer those questions. It gives you a bit of an idea, again, about these prime ministers. And a bit like the previous video where it talked about previous prime ministers and kind of explain what kind of job prime ministers do. This one's a little bit more focused, especially in the kind of the second half or after the first quarter, about the Prime Minister's office, and a little bit more about relation with the cabinet. It also goes up to David Cameron as well, the first year of David Cameron. So I'd like to watch that. Also, this is voluntary, but we've signed up for a free trial for a month to, I think it's the University of Warwick. But anyway, there's lectures from various academics on aspects of British politics, also on history and also on all sorts of other subjects as well. I'll put it on the email, but there's a series of little lectures, I think not very long, I think it's like an hour in total, about the Prime Minister. But I've noticed there's other ones, like there's one on, for example, the Westminster model and civil servants. If you want to do some extra work on that civil servant, know what civil servants are, I just want to do some extra stuff, then I'll send the links and stuff to that website as well. Again, it's only a free trial for a month, so get on there. I noticed stuff about the isms as well, various bits and pieces. Yeah, so what I'll do, I'll upload this video, I'll send you out an email. Oh yeah, and I'd also like to do a timed essay. Okay, I'll put the details on my email. So if you can do all that for early next week, and then next, I don't know, Monday or Tuesday, I'll do the next video, which will be about prime ministers and their cabinet. I don't mean the IKEA variety. There, I've made the joke.